Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Binalyze AIR release preview for version 1.7.35. My name is Steve Jackson. I'm the VP of Growth here at Binalyze, and I'm joined by my colleague Emre, who's the founder and CEO of the business. We are going to take you through some of the main features that we have released today in the latest version of Binalyze AIR. But before we do that, just a little bit of housekeeping. So if you want to submit questions or feedback, please use the Q&A to the right-hand side, and we'll deal with questions at the end of the presentation. We've also created a Discord server, which you're invited to join, and there is a link also in the Q&A section on the right. The purpose of the Discord server is for general discussion around digital and enterprise forensics. It's also a great source of technical support and guidance from the Binalyze team. So please, if you use Discord, please feel free to jump over there and join our server. We'll be glad to see you. If you require support for any Binalyze products, there's two principal ways of getting support. The first is via email at support@binalyze.com, and the second way would be via the website binalyze.com/support. So that's the housekeeping out of the way. What we're going to show you today are the demo. We're going to demonstrate the highlights of 1.7.35, and you will see SFTP evidence repositories, a new compression and encryption functionality, endpoint isolation, support for policies, and probably the biggest one is we're now supporting Linux. This version is available now, so if you want to update your version of AIR, you can go to binalyze.com/AIR and download the product from there. So with that, I will hand you over to Emre, and he will take you through the features.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks a lot for everyone for joining. Let me share my screen. As you already mentioned, it was a really busy month. And thanks to our team, we were able to release a lot of great features in this version. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, looks good.
All right. So let's start with the first one. In this version 1.7.35, we have added support for SFTP. This was a long time requested feature. And previously, when you click on an endpoint, let's go to endpoints page. And when you click on an endpoint, especially when you click acquire task, the default option was saving evidence into local, but we also provided support for SMB shares since the early days. With this version, we have extended that support, and now you can add a new repository here. And here, if you select the SFTP, like checkbox here, radio button, you can provide the host name. If you are serving the SFTP on a different port, you can change it from here. And by default, it will use the root directory of that SFTP server, but you can also configure it so you can also ask it to use a different folder for the evidence you'll be collecting from endpoints. Once you save it, it becomes available in this evidence repository section, and you can quickly select one of them and start using it. The second one is evidence compression and encryption. The previous version of AIR was collecting the evidence in raw format, and it was taking a bit more time and space in terms of disk space. So with this version, we have added evidence compression, as you see here, and you can also, it comes by default enabled, and also we have encrypt evidence option here. If you provide a password, all the evidence will be encrypted with IS-256. And that's the second feature. The third one is endpoint isolation. So when you click on an endpoint here, as you know, we have a few options here. Endpoint related options, such as shutting down, rebooting, and isolating the endpoint are on the right upper section here. And the importance of isolation is, I mean, whenever you need to breach to an incident, almost all the time, you need to isolate the machine so no one can access it from the outside world and also inside the enterprise. And at the same time, you don't want anything from that machine to go outside of that machine. So it's just like covering the endpoint with a special cover, but at the same time, allowing you to keep investigating the endpoint. So there's a private tunnel between you and the endpoint. So you'll still be able to collect evidence. You'll still be able to run triage on the endpoint or create a timeline by clicking these actions. But the endpoint will be isolated. So let me make a quick demo. It's as easy as clicking isolate. And the task is immediately sent to that endpoint. And then it will take just a bit of time. And as you see, we see the endpoint isolated now. You still can perform all the actions here. So it doesn't mean that you won't be able to access the endpoint. And that's the third option. And unisolating it is as easy as clicking this button. And the fourth one is, this is especially addressing the needs of large enterprises because the product is currently used on enterprises like large enterprises that has more than 50,000 endpoints. And when it comes to having this many endpoints, it becomes really important to configure some settings related to the endpoint or the acquisition. I mean, the tasks based on some properties of the endpoint or the properties of the group endpoint resides in. So for this, we have added the policies feature. If you go to settings here, clicking on policies, it comes by default disabled. So that way, all the options you see here in endpoint performing like actions. So when you click on acquire, you see all the options here by default visible. But when you enable policies, all those options will be decided by the policies that matches to that endpoint. So let me first enable it. By default, we have a default policy. It means if you don't want to set the encryption password or if you don't want to enable encryption for each and every acquisition, you can quickly change the settings from here. So you can enable evidence compression for all the acquisitions, or you can select some evidence repository as the default location for all the evidences that will be executed on the endpoints. And you can also limit the CPU resource usage. As we already know, AIR is really light on resources, but most of the large enterprises have these type of like requirements that are enforced by their compliance department. So that's the reason we provided this feature. So this is default policy. Now let me create another one and let's give it a name. So let's apply this policy to domain controllers only. And you can select the evidence repository here for Windows and Linux separately. And you can provide the CPU limit. You can also enable the compression. And then once we have all these settings, the only thing that remains is adding a condition here. So adding a new condition, for example, let's say all the machines that have this string in their computer names. So let's say DC. So if the machine has a DC string in its computer name, this policy will be applied. You can enrich this filter by adding new like conditions, such as you can add a regular expression. For example, if it matches the, let's say DC, and when you save it, this is for the demonstration purposes, so it doesn't match with any of the endpoints we have now. That's why AIR is warning you that the filter you have provided does not match with any endpoint, but we'll still click OK. So now we have a new policy, and now we have these priority fields here. So this is a higher priority, and by default, the priority matching starts from top to bottom. Whenever there's a match, the configuration in this policy will be applied. Now let me create another one, let's say for mail servers, and add some condition. Let's click OK. And now you can also change the priorities here just by dragging and dropping the policy. And that's the policy feature. And as you see, just because we have enabled the policies, when you go to endpoints section now, and when you click on an endpoint, when you like to acquire evidence, AIR will show you that the options provided by the policy will be applied by default, but it doesn't mean that this will be this can't be changed. You can quickly select this use custom option. So even if you have a matching policy for this endpoint or a group of endpoints, you can still configure the settings from here. So they can be easily overridden by just enabling these options. And the last and the biggest one is our Linux support. It was a long time requested feature because, you know, when it comes to enterprise environments, Linux is taking a big part as acting as the servers. So in this version, we have added support for Linux. As the preview version, you can perform the acquisition, and we are now working on triage and timeline features for the upcoming versions. And if you like to add a new endpoint, a new server, a Linux server, clicking this button gives you these options. Previously, we had only Windows here. Now we have Debian and Red Hat distros mainly, and it's quite comprehensive. And as you see, we have a number of options for deploying. Basically, they all do the same, but these are provided for ease of deployment. So you can download the package by clicking this button, or you can copy the curl command or wget command, or you can download it and run this command on the console of that endpoint. And once you're done, you have your endpoints registered here. And you can apply filters. So if you like to see only the Linux boxes, you can quickly come here and apply a filter. And now we only see the Linux machines. And when you make an acquisition, here is what we have. So it's the exact same experience you had with IRAC. And it's just like acquiring evidence from a Windows box. So the report is the look and feel of the report is same. Of course, the types of evidence is different. And as the case in IRAC Windows, it's quite comprehensive. So it has almost everything you need, starting from system information to like processes, open files, all the users, all the failed login attempts, and it even contains the APT sources and other package manager related evidences. So it's quite comprehensive. And that's all from my side, Steve. We can get questions if there are any.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a few questions, which I'm just going to go through now and get your answers for. Okay. So we've got the first questions come in is Docker supported?
Great one. So AIR is like every day we are coming closer to becoming the most comprehensive solution for enterprise, for instance. And as we all know, Docker is a big part of it because it's an extension of the on-prem platforms. So the Linux support was mainly added for that reason. We are heading towards supporting Docker and Kubernetes in the upcoming versions. And then we'll be adding support for other cloud-related artifacts, such as like Office and other cloud applications. So the answer is yes. We are coming closer to that point.
Great. And a second question we've had is, are there any plans to include cloud storage repositories?
Yes, actually, the SFTP support was the beginning. We have been receiving a lot of requests from our customers for Azure Blob Storage and Amazon S3 buckets. So in the upcoming versions, these will be added as well. That's why we have added SFTP into evidence repositories. So SFTP is just the first one of remote evidence repositories. So starting with this version, now you can also, especially this is an important feature for MSSPs, because in the MSSP case, when they show up in their customer site, they somehow want to export the evidence so they can download it in their lab and start the investigation. So the cloud storage is definitely one of the highest priority with our team.
That's great. Okay, and then the last question we have, which I think you did touch on, but perhaps it got missed. What are the versions of Linux that are supported? And I guess my secondary question would be, when will future versions of Linux be supported?
Actually, adding Linux is like quite fragmented. So there are a lot of Linux distros out there. And there are a number of Linux versions that are widely seen in enterprise environments. And currently we support like all Debian distros. So Ubuntu and other Debian distros are supported. And we also support Red Hat Linux and Fedora. And in the, all the Linux versions that were released in the last 10 years, that's how I can say, because the list is quite comprehensive. So, but all the Linux versions that were released in the last 10 years are supported right now. And we are doing our best to add more support to make it even like more backward compatible. So we'll add more support to even older Linux versions in the upcoming releases.
Great. Okay. So that's it, guys. That's our release for this version. If you do have additional questions that you haven't had a chance to put into the Q&A panel, then please go over to the Discord server. The invite link is still there, or you can contact us at support@binalyze.com and we'll get right back to you with the answers. There will be future versions of these release previews coming thick and fast. The next one will probably be in around 3 or 4 weeks when we announce our drone product, so keep an eye open for that. Thank you for attending, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thanks a lot for everyone.